you ready for a new experience? To see life from another point of view? New hope, new expression, new joy. This is your radio hour. Welcome to Viewpoint with Father John.
And welcome, friends. You're tuned to NBC Radio, KCAA, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or you can listen from anywhere around the world at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I am your host, Father John Reed. By the way, you can follow us on both Instagram and Facebook. Just look for Viewpoint with Father John. Also, if you have missed the show, just go to YouTube. You can get all last 3 years of episodes just in the search bar. Put Viewpoint with Father John, KCAA. And if you want to follow us on Twitter, you can find me at Father John Reed. Father is spelled out, and Reed is the proper Irish, R-E-I-D. Yes, yesterday was our High Holy Day. And you can follow me there. You can send me notes at any of those, or you can go to viewpointwithfatherjohn.com if you want to send me a note that way as well. But chances are I'll get it quicker on Facebook or Instagram probably, because they're more fun for me to go around. All of God's children are endowed with extraordinary purpose and ability. I'm on a quest to help as many as possible fully realizing their divinely inspired potential. Disposing a false narrative and embracing genuineness inspires clarity of purpose. My role is to help overcome self-imposed limitations in realizing one's spiritual potentials. And I'm sorry, I'm slurring a little bit tonight. I swear I haven't been drinking. I know yesterday was St. Patty's Day, but just having some medical stuff going on. So maybe I need more medicine.
That would be my thought, yeah.
You having Norco on you?
No.
Probably narco, but not Norco. Yeah, I got you. Okay. As we do every week, I'd like to tell you about the best, speaking of pharmacology, the best pharmacy in the entire Southern California region, which is Claremont Pharmacy in the city of Claremont, which is owned by my dear friend, Dr. Nikki Ho. And all kidding aside, she is the best pharmacist I've ever known and the most caring. You know, if you don't want to be treated like a number and like someone who doesn't matter, this is the place to go. They take care of all my pharmaceutical needs, and especially my diabetic medication. And so go and tell Dr. Nikki that I said hello. Frank is making faces at me through the glass, and he's going to make me laugh, and then I'm going to have to go in there and straighten him out. And then he's going to need you, Dr. Smith.
Yes, I know.
Also, I'd like to tell you about the place where I get my hair cut, which is not just on my head, but at Uppercuts Barbershop. And go and see my friend Sam. That's my personal barber. Or Leo will cut your hair. All the barbers there are really good.
It looks good, too.
Thank you. They use a sharp razor.
Yeah.
And you should see what they did with my back. But it is a great barbershop. It's in Pomona, California. And so those are some good places to check out. Also, tell you about my friend Glenn Kirshner with Justice Matters. And Glenn Kirshner is a good guy. You'll find him on YouTube. The program is called Justice Matters with Glenn Kirshner. Glenn is a personal friend of mine. This is not a paid advertisement. He was a federal prosecutor for many years. He spent 6 years in the United States Army as a JAG attorney, JAG prosecutor. And when Glenn says something, you can count on it. I fact check everything, as a lot of you know. And so even though he's my friend, I fact check him. And he's always right up there with 99 percentile, because you're not allowed to say 100%. But he's really up there. And particularly right now with what's going on with the new Attorney General and everything, he's a good source to have to find out what do these different things mean, what are we moving forward with. So, you know, give it a look. And if you really like it, you can go on Patreon and support him. I subscribe there. I give him $15 a month because I believe in what he's doing. And anyone knows that if I pull out the crowbar to get the wallet out of my pocket, it must be something special. So, and it's nice to let the moths out.
Yeah, I was going to say you got to air it out every once in a while.
Yeah, every once in a while, just for the heck of it. You know, we got to do the part that is the hardest to do on this show, and that's the COVID numbers. And if you're sick of hearing COVID numbers, then get a vaccine. So we don't have to keep doing COVID numbers.
Absolutely.
Please get a vaccine. So I checked this just before going on air. My source is Johns Hopkins University. So you know these are straight numbers. They're not politically motivated. These are science numbers. And the number of cases right now is 29,664,869. And the number of deaths, this just breaks my heart, 539,659.
Wow.
Brothers and sisters, I'm doing a lot of funerals right now. Last week I did way more funerals than I should have. My body paid for it because I'm not supposed to be doing that much work, as some of you know. And all but one of those funerals was COVID.
Wow.
All but one of them. And I did a funeral every day.
Wow.
So that's pretty serious stuff. I am delighted this evening to have the guest we have this evening. He's a dear friend of the show, a dear friend of mine. I consider him a brother. And that's Dr. John Smith. And Dr. Smith is a psychotherapist, a professor, and author of the book, The Authentic Man, A Guide to Happiness and Purpose. And the reason I brought him on again tonight is because we want to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD for short. There's a lot of misunderstanding about it. You don't have to be in the military to be diagnosed with it, although many people in the military who have seen such incredible things are accurately diagnosed with it. But sometimes people will have PTSD and they don't know they have PTSD. They don't know why they're having the experiences they're having. They think there's something wrong with their stability, something wrong with their mental strength, and it has nothing to do with that. PTSD is a real thing. You can't just change your mind and say, I'm just not going to let that bother me.
Right.
And in fact, it's that kind of thinking that makes PTSD even worse. Mm-hmm. And we've grown up in a culture where it's hard to ask for help, and it's getting better now, but it's not as good as it needs to be. And the reason we're talking about this tonight is because a lot of people need help, and we want you to get that help. We truly do. Taking your own life is not the answer. Killing your spouse is not the answer. Because sometimes PTSD winds up with murder-suicide.
Right.
And so, Dr. Smith, will you start us off with explaining a little bit of what post-traumatic stress disorder is,
Sure.
and maybe some of what it's not?
Well, thank you again for having me back. I love being here and being with you on the show, so I really appreciate that. So, just like we tend to use the word depression a lot, oh, I'm really depressed today, we sometimes will say, oh, man, that was so awful, I got post-traumatic stress after that. Well, post-traumatic stress disorder is a real thing. It's a real condition, and when people who truly have post-traumatic stress disorder are suffering. Mm-hmm. The first thing I want to tell everybody is that it's not that something is wrong with you, although it's affecting you. It's something happened, maybe several things, maybe one big thing, but something happened to you that affected you, and it continues to haunt you, trouble you, and affect you in ways that are troubling. You might think you're crazy, but literally you're not crazy. You're reacting and responding. It's like your mind and body got the on switch went on and it won't switch off.
Right.
Okay. It's like the rabbit's being chased by the wolf. Well, the rabbit's system is on overdrive. He's hyper alert. He's hyper aroused. He's hyper energized. All of that's necessary. It's called fight or flight.
Right.
And all of that is necessary for the rabbit to have what it takes to survive and get away from the wolf. Right. So now with the rabbit, he gets in his hole and he's safe. Well, immediately the off switch turns off that energy because there's no more wolf chasing him. Therefore, there's no more purpose for all of that juice.
Right.
unfortunately, in humans, because we have the capacity to remember and replay, I call them old movies in our head. Every time we think something triggers the memory or we think about the thing that happened, the emotions and even the physical responses that we experienced in that whatever happened, I call that the soundtrack to the movie. It turns on.
Yes.
Right. Sometimes it even turns on in our sleep, because one of the common symptoms of PTSD is having what we call flashbacks, or memories of the experience, and nightmares and things like that,
And night terrors,
which are pretty common. And again, they're awful to experience, but what that means is that something happened, it's still affecting you, and that's usually a sign, hey, I need to get some help. Because if you're experiencing them on a continuous basis after a traumatic event or several traumatic events, then that's a pretty good indicator that you may have what we call post-traumatic stress disorder. So the good news is that when we do have ways to switch that off switch, and it doesn't have to involve heavy doses of medication and years of therapy. We have some new things that are actually very effective at turning that switch off, that require very little therapy and very little time and money and expense. So I just want to say that it's help is available. You got to get the right help.
Yes. I'm glad you said that, because this is not something that a general therapist should just say, I deal with that too. This is a specialty. Now, most therapists have a general idea about it, but if you haven't practiced in that and you don't know some of the side effects to look for, that could be dangerous. So don't just go to just anybody for PTSD training, or not training, but treatment.
Right.
Well,
and you know, a lot of people want to avoid thinking about and talking about the horrible things that they've experienced, and so I do whatever I can to avoid it, and then, you know, but it's still troubling me. So the last thing I want to do is go into somebody's office and start talking, you know, ad infinitum about something that's horrible, and, you know, I'll feel worse before I feel better. So that's why I'm saying there are some new methods and techniques that require very little repetition of the traumatic memory and event, but is very, very effective in getting that the negative emotions cleared up in a relatively short period of time. Right. So just know that those treatments are available. We can talk about those maybe toward the end as to what kinds of treatments are probably maybe a little more effective than others. So
right.
Yeah.
And what are some symptoms that people might be able to recognize that they're having that could indicate, I mean, I'm not asking people to diagnose themselves, but just some, you know, indicator lights on the computer panel that might say, you know, there could be something in this area, might get your, you know, the check engine light sort of thing.
Well, first of all, it doesn't matter what happened. It's how what happened affected you.
Right.
And it may have affected you in ways that you don't even realize, and it may not even show up until much later. So a lot of people don't recognize that what they're experiencing is related to something that happened earlier.
Right.
Okay. Or maybe there have been several things that happened, and then all of a sudden, see, one of the things that the mind does is to, I call it Christmas tree lights.
Okay.
You know how Christmas tree lights are all wired on one circuit.
Yes.
So, you know how you plug them in, then hopefully they all light up, right?
Yes.
But what happens when one of those goes out? They all go out.
They all go out.
So the mind organizes things on circuits, so things that are structurally similar, so traumatic experiences are structurally similar, even though they're not the same thing, they're obviously traumatic. So the mind says, okay, these all go on the same circuit.
Right.
So when something happens that triggers one light, the whole circuit lights up. When
Yes.
something happens, so it doesn't matter which light gets triggered, but all of them get triggered. So all of a sudden, somebody who's had multiple traumas can start experiencing these symptoms that we're going to talk about and not understand or even know, where did this come from? Why is this happening? Why is it happening now? What's wrong with me? Oh, I must be going crazy. Because a lot of times one of the symptoms is that it's not uncommon for people, especially if it happened as children, to repress
Right.
their memory of the trauma, so they don't even realize that or have a memory of what happened, but all of a sudden they're having these intrusive thoughts and memories, and they're having these feelings and emotions, and they think, oh my gosh, I must be going crazy. What's happening here? And that's one of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, is where these memories come flooding back in, either as nightmares or what we call flashbacks, or just intrusive memories, and then the person starts having all of these obviously negative emotional reactions to it, and they think, oh my gosh, what's going on here? And that's a pretty common thing for people to experience.
I'm going to take a step backward, and then we'll go to commercial. Dr. Smith used the term repression. I just want to explain the difference between repression and suppression. Suppression is we're pushing feelings down, and we know it. We're doing it consciously. Repression is we're pushing these things down for our survival, and we don't even realize we're doing it with our foreconscious. And so that's the difference between the two. And Frank is looking at me like I'm going to have a both preconscious, foreconscious, and subconscious issue if we don't go to commercial. And so you're listening to Viewpoint with Father John. Our guest is Dr. John Smith tonight.
Thank you.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org. www.4pfp as in personalfuneralplanning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran-owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
Talk 102.3 FM Riverside. KCAA NBCRadioNews.com.
The Tri-City Shopping Center in Redlands is serving up some really cool ice cream at La Micho Acana. Then get your chocolates and other delights from C's Candies. Moms and future moms who visit the mall can cool off and relax while they get treated like royalty at Shiny Nails or Francis Nails, and then pampered at Texture Hair. The Tri-City Center is filled with retailers who care about you. Shop at the Tri-City Center in Redlands and see why they call it the Mall with a Heart.
And welcome back. You are tuned to NBC Radio, KCAA, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or you can listen from anywhere in the world at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I am your host, Father John Reed, and my guest tonight is Dr. John Smith. A quick shout out to Frank, the best sound man in the business.
Yay.
Although I'm upset with that last commercial you just put on. Dr. Smith and I were talking on the way out here about the manicure and pedicure. And I told him I haven't had a manicure in a long time. I went to the nail spa because I thought it'd be a nice thing to do. And they asked, you want both manicure and pedicure? I said, yeah, I came here to get pampered. So they handed me a diaper. I just,
Well, it depends.
Yes, it does depend.
It depends.
Yes, but I did get pampered. Anyhow, so now that you need therapy after that, all righty. So we're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, and I had digressed just a moment before we went to commercial talking about the difference between repression and suppression. So I hope you have an idea of that. We're going to talk a little bit of the symptomology of post-traumatic stress disorder. And again, you don't have to have all of them. You could have a couple of these. And, and you're not weak because you have them. You're responding to a situation.
And I want to emphasize that because I know I've worked with a lot of veterans and first responders, military, police. They all have this idea that to seek help is a sign of weakness, and it's not. And I think things are starting to change a little bit as we recognize how debilitating PTSD can be, how common it is, and how we can get people back to regular functioning if they seek help quickly, and if they get the right help, then it need not be a debilitating condition. And we've seen suicide rates go up primarily due to people suffering from PTSD, and because of that, they've suffered for a long time. They see no hope, and they think the only way out is to commit suicide. And I just have to say that it isn't. That's not true. There is help available.
And I just want to add in there, if I may, that you could be going along just fine for a long time, and then suddenly something hits. I had a friend, we call him Digger. He worked at Riverside National Cemetery, and he was a backhoe operator, but that was his nickname, was Digger. Had been in Vietnam and was fine for the longest time. And then about 15 years ago, when they were doing the honors and they fired the rifles, suddenly he's on the ground.
Right.
And he went into a total flashback.
Mm-hmm.
And he had been okay for years, but it was the right moment.
Right.
At the right pitch, and this poor man was back in Vietnam.
Well, that's right. And see, our primitive mind records everything that has to do with the traumatic experience, so that we remember it, and it aids in our survival in the future.
Right.
So it records sights, sounds, smells, places, temperature, time of day, people, anything that had to do with it gets recorded, so that when there's a gunshot, okay, that may not have bothered him at some point, but that may have brought up and triggered, because obviously gunshot and war go together, so that brought it up. And it may not have been something that was near the top. It was something that was buried in there, and all of a sudden, right place, right time, right sound, right. And there you go. And
it may not have even been the sound. It could have been the smell, because smell is the strongest trigger of things. He could have smelled the gunpowder.
Yep.
And I know that when I worked in law enforcement, you can't fire a weapon without the smell of gunpowder. And I'm very sensitive to that. That's how I usually know the difference between a firecracker and a firearm, because although they're both gunpowder, they have a distinct difference of smell.
Yeah. And so let me just I'm going to get into specific symptoms,
sure,
but I also want to say, okay, what's going on, all right, is actually your mind is working exactly as it's designed to do. Right? You're not crazy. What's happening is that at the moment, I would guess most of you at home probably have on your expensive electronic equipment, you have this, like your TVs or your computers or whatever. Hopefully you have this thing called a surge protector.
Right.
It's a strip that has a little circuit breaker on it, so that if there's a power surge that comes in from outside, it will trip that circuit so that it doesn't go and blow up your expensive TV, electronic gadgets, right? So your mind has sort of the same thing. It has a circuit breaker to protect you from being overloaded from an emotional experience. So when you're experiencing something that is traumatic, which is usually something that is at least perceived as life-threatening or threatening in some way to your well-being, then if it's powerful enough, it will blow that circuit, so that the mind sort of gets stuck at the worst possible moment of that experience, and that little software chunk in the mind doesn't get updated because it doesn't get the good news that it's over, it happened, it's finished, you survived, you made it.
Right.
It's still thinking that whatever is happening or whatever happened is still happening.
Correct.
Okay. And one of the symptoms of PTSD then is that the person continues to re-experience the memory of the trauma emotionally as if it's still happening, not that it's, gosh, that's sad that happened, or that's, I think about it, gosh, that's awful, but, I'm kind of over it. They're experiencing it in real time as if it is still happening. So that's why when we use certain methods, we are kind of looking to literally update the software of the mind, like updating a computer, to clear up those little chunks of software that didn't get the good news that the war's over.
Yes, exactly.
I survived it. I won. I made it. Another common symptom that happens to people with PTSD is the symptom of hyperarousal, or where they're basically, they can't turn off their nervous system.
Correct.
So they're always walking around sort of on edge. They even have like an exaggerated startle response where if they hear a loud noise or something, they jump. They're very jumpy.
Well, I know a guy, husband of a friend of mine, who suffers from PTSD, has for many years, and every night he does his watch, his guard watch, and he goes in the middle of the night, wakes up, goes in the middle of the night, checks every lock on every door, every window, everything, and he didn't even realize he was doing it for years.
Right.
And then finally, when his wife told him about it, he realized he was walking guard duty.
Right. I've known several people who've been in the military, or I've seen this in law enforcement officers as well. They go into a restaurant, or they go into any place. They're going to sit in the corner or sit with their back to the wall and their face towards the entrance so they can see whatever's coming toward them.
I still do that.
And it's a programmed, learned response that isn't necessarily an indicator of PTSD, but that is an indicator of still that high level of arousal.
Right.
And that's common because it's it's your survival. If you got to be alert, you got to be on guard, you got to be ready, you got to be prepared, or bad things can happen, and that becomes sort of a learned behavior.
You and I were talking about martial arts on the way out, and we were discussing muscle memory. Mm-hmm. And it's a form of muscle memory. Your brain is a muscle. And so, it's figuratively speaking, but it gets the muscle memory through the autonomic and central nervous system. And so, you're absolutely correct with that.
Yeah. Other things that we might see, and again, as Father John said, not necessarily all of these occur in everybody, but these are common symptoms, and the more of these you have, the more likely you would have what we call post-traumatic stress disorder. Just an overwhelming sense of hopelessness, which often is accompanied by or caused by depression. So some cases of depression are actually caused by PTSD, right? So it sometimes they go hand in hand, not always, but sometimes they do. The person starts to isolate and withdraw from others and from friends and pleasurable activities, and they have difficulty maintaining close relationships.
And that's something that often gets covered up by people being involved with video games, and they just think they're just involved with video games when people don't realize it's an isolation. It's a safe place where they don't have to really function. Even if it's one of those games where you have other people who are logged in, you're still isolated.
Yes, and there's a distance.
Yes,
and the other symptom that often shows up is a deep sort of an emotional numbing. You don't feel anything.
Yes.
And it's real easy when you're in a video game also to just detach and not feel a thing.
Correct.
Right. So I'll start avoiding anything that would cause me to feel so that I don't have to feel anything. Or I start using drugs and alcohol heavily in order to numb myself or to quiet those feelings. And a lot of times people do that because it works.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so if it works, I'm going to keep doing it. And then what turned out started as a solution then becomes a problem. So then we have two problems to work with.
As a friend of mine says, first the booze gave me wings, and then it allowed me to fly, and then it took away my wings, and I was grounded for life.
Yeah. Another one that is actually quite common is, especially for people they've been through a traumatic experience. I'm going to give some examples, like a horrible accident or war or violence, or they've witnessed someone die or something happen tragically. Usually there is excessive guilt.
Yes.
And in fact, a lot of times we'll call it survivor's guilt.
Yes.
Why wasn't it me? Or it should have been me, or maybe I could have done something and I couldn't, or I didn't, or so we see when there's excessive guilt about something like that, that just sort of helps keep that traumatic stuff frozen, right?
Yes.
And I've seen people who've had frozen trauma you mentioned the Vietnam veteran. Right now, those guys are getting up there in their 70s, and they still suffer from this. They've been suffering since the 60s. So 30, 40, 50 years of suffering. I don't know how many World War II vets there are or how many Korea vets there are, but those guys are still suffering. Obviously, Iraq and Afghanistan and those guys are, and I say guys, women too, of course, are all suffering. I don't say all, but many of them are, and there are a lot of people that are suffering that we don't know are suffering.
Right, and there's nothing worse in my mind than when someone says, well, just get over it. Well, it's not just who you are, it's what happened to you.
Yes.
And, I cut off your leg, and I say, well, just get over it. You weren't using it that much to begin with. And I'm able to walk away, but you're still missing a leg.
Right. Right.
And telling me.
And ironically, and it doesn't always work, but the person who lost a leg, for example, may actually be coping better than the person who didn't, because they have such guilt that why wasn't it them?
Right.
So, and again, it's about stuckness. It's about the memory getting stuck and replaying sort of on automatic pilot, even when you don't want it to, and then it causes you to respond in ways that are actually they're attempts to adapt that become maladaptive, like isolating, staying away from relationships. The other thing that happens often is that people get very irritable, even explosive, very angry. And usually that's a personality change. They weren't always like that before the trauma. And so you see a lot of this stuff occurring in the months and years after the trauma. Mm-hmm. It's normal to react to something bad that happened, let's say an automobile accident or something like that. It's normal to have a reaction to that might sound similar. It's called an acute stress reaction. So PTSD is something that sort of pops up later. So most people will eventually get over whatever the experience was and return back to normal on their own. But PTSD is when that is prolonged and it doesn't go away on its own, and sometimes it gets worse.
Well, of our generation, it's like the record where the needle is stuck and just keeps playing the same thing, da-doo, 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 and they can't knock the needle over to the next track. And you kids would have to look that up. These are things that really existed, vinyl records. So.
Right. Some people in our audience, I'm thinking right now of the situation we've been in. It's been almost exactly 1 year to the day since I know I have been in lockdown since the COVID thing hit. I mean, you can decide whatever your start date is, but it's been approximately 1 year that this has been going on, and I know my life has changed dramatically, as I'm sure everybody else has. I know I've been on this show several times talking about ways to cope with all of this.
Yes.
There are right now people who have experienced this time and will suffer PTSD as a result of it, along with other conditions like depression and anxiety. I know it's happening. It's going to happen. We're going to see a lot of people with this. That's why I just want to urge people to go. It's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. If you're having these symptoms that we're describing, it doesn't take years of therapy anymore to get better. It doesn't take mega doses of psychiatric medication to get better.
Right.
There is stuff that can be done that is, works relatively quickly for most people. Also, if you've had previous traumas, remember Christmas tree lights. So while maybe this situation isn't as bad as others, but it's similar, it's going to light up all these other traumas that might have been worse. So all of a sudden you wonder, why am I feeling this way? It's because your Christmas tree lights all lit up.
Exactly. Speaking of Christmas tree lights lighting up, Frank's looking at me through the glass again like he's going to light me up if we don't go to commercial. So you're listening to Viewpoint with Father John on NBC Radio, KCAA, and our guest tonight is Dr. John Smith.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org. www.4pfp as in personalfuneralplanning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran-owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
Talk 102.3 FM Riverside. KCAA NBCRadioNews.com.
The Tri-City Shopping Center in Redlands is serving up some really cool ice cream at Lamicho Acana. Then get your chocolates and other delights from See's Candies. Moms and future moms who visit the mall can cool off and relax while they get treated like royalty at Shiny Nails or Francis Nails and then pampered at Texture Hair. The Tri-City Center is filled with retailers who care about you. Shop at the Tri-City Center in Redlands and see why they call it the mall with a heart.
And welcome back. You are tuned to NBC Radio, KCAA, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or you can listen from anywhere in the world at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I am your host, Father John Reed. And just a shout out to people around the world that have been writing in. I'm really grateful that you tune in. Some of you catch the show on YouTube. Some of you stay up super late. Well, for some of you, it's daytime now across the world. But I appreciate the fact that you tune in, and I know you do because you talk about things we talk about on the show, and it just, well, I'm honored, and I thank you for that. And tonight, my guest is the Honorable Dr. John Smith, who is a psychotherapist, a professor, and author of the book, The Authentic Man, A Guide to Happiness and Purpose. Now, I've read this book a few times, and so I want to tell you it's a very good book. I highly recommend it, and not just for men but for women to read as well. There's good material for either to have, and so I just want to give that shout out there to recommend good reading for that. I wish you'd do that on audiobooks.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Maybe we can talk about that. I've thought about doing that, and a lot of people are using audiobooks these days, and my wife does. She's always doing it, and I've never thought about doing that. So there you go.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something we should talk about.
Yes,
So,
yes, I would gladly take a commission.
yeah, I'm sure you will. I'll give you half of nothing that I
There
earn
you
for
go.
it. So
Well, I've always wanted to be a prophet.
yeah.
Okay, back to serious stuff. Now, one of the things we said earlier in the show, I know we have a couple more things to go through, but
Well-
I'd like to go through treatment a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, folks. This is my opinion, not the opinion of the station. No. I have some judgments and biases, which I'm going to own right now, about some of the treatments for PTSD.
Okay.
Right? Some that are what are called evidence-based treatments, which means that there's some evidence to show that they work.
Right.
Okay. But the evidence is kind of skewed because of the way they do the research. So let me give you an example.
Okay.
All right. There is a treatment called exposure therapy.
Right.
Which sounds awful just on the face, right? So what they do, let's say for a veteran or whatever, is that they have that person replay and even reenact. They've even used virtual reality software to reenact the traumatic event, and they keep talking about it or replaying it over and over and over again until they stop feeling bad.
And sometimes they even take them back to the place where it happened.
Yes.
Yes.
So, so basically it's based on the idea that you're going to have to feel a lot worse before you feel better. And the problem with that is, while it may work for some people, a lot of people can't handle it and they drop out of treatment, or they get worse before they get better, or they drop out and don't complete it. And that's not good.
Right.
Okay.
And some things you just can't desensitize to.
That's true. So while it is a treatment, it's not one of my favorites. Let's put
Right.
it that way.
Right.
Right. Traditional talk therapy, unless it's a special kind of trauma-focused therapy, is probably also not going to be very effective for most people. All right. So the idea of talking about it over and over again without clear techniques that are designed to help clear that stuff up is probably not the best way to go about it either. In fact, it could be re-traumatizing.
Right.
Okay. So what do we do to keep re-traumatizing our clients? So what methods? These are, again, my personal opinions, because this is what I practice. This is what I think is most effective, and I know it works because I've done it on hundreds of people. There are methods based in neuroscience that use a process, and you can, if you don't believe me, look it up. There's some great YouTube videos. You can look it up on Google. It's called memory reconsolidation.
Right.
So memory reconsolidation is a neuroscience concept or a thing that actually happens. Basically what it is like recalling an old memory or movie and then doing some stuff to clear the emotion that's attached to it by creating a mismatch between the original memory and a new learning or a new memory, okay, of that. So not to get too complex with that, but anything that causes memory reconsolidation is going to work, and interestingly, it's going to work almost immediately. And the other thing that makes it different than other treatments is that once the update of the software occurs, it's permanent.
Okay.
So it's not like something that's going to work for 5 minutes and then it's going to come back later. We know memory reconsolidation has occurred when the things that triggered it no longer trigger it.
Right. That makes sense.
Okay. So, we test it, or they test it, the client tests it and field tests it. And, once it no longer causes the reaction that it used to cause, and once the person can no longer even cause it, sometimes that happens literally in one session. Sometimes it takes several, but it still, once it occurs, we have a way of measuring it because the person can't get triggered anymore. What kinds of treatments are there? Are several therapies that are types of therapy that use memory reconsolidation, but there's EMDR, which a lot of people have heard of. It doesn't necessarily say it uses memory reconsolidation, but the eye movement process and the way that it's done, that's probably what is the benefit of it. It probably does that. I practice a technique I've actually developed my own called Accelerated Cognitive and Emotional Solutions, or ACEs. Right. The main foundation to my training what I learned, why I practice is a method called rapid resolution therapy. A man by the name of John Conley developed that. He's a wizard of a man, very, very brilliant. There's a new one out now called Accelerated Resolution Therapy, which sounds kind of similar to rapid resolution therapy, but it also uses memory reconsolidation as its foundation. So I would recommend people look out and seek people who practice these methods because they work. And they don't take a lot of time, and they don't require the person to go over the traumatic story or event or memory multiple times over and over again. They're designed to provide almost immediate or close to immediate symptom relief.
Now, there's one I heard of recently, and I'm trying to think of the letters for it, but it has to do with a magnetic pulse in the brain. You put on a type of helmet.
Isn't it TM
something? Yeah.
Transmagnetic something. Yes, I've heard of that. Uh-huh.
Yeah, because I understand that's being used with some cases now too, more towards the depressive end.
Yeah.
But you have to do like 20 or 30 sessions with it.
Right.
And it can leave you with headaches and stuff.
Yes.
And I'm not knocking. I don't know much about it.
I don't either. Or transcranial. I don't know.
Transcranial magnetic.
Yeah. We're on the same page.
Roll a marble. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not dissing.
Yeah. Of interest also is that they are now using, with some success, some psychedelic drugs or medications in controlled setting, of course.
Sign me up.
Yeah, well, they're using a form of MDMA or ecstasy
Right.
to help people with PTSD because it helps them sort of unlock their emotions. They're using, believe it or not, they're using LSD, or they're also using magic mushrooms, psilocybin, to help with these conditions. There are also ketamine treatment centers that are available where you get a dose of ketamine, and at the same time you're getting psychotherapy at the same time. Again, very promising results, ironically, and of course these treatments are not long-term, they're relatively short-term, but they seem to be having fairly good effects. So again, how we had treated trauma, and I probably left out a few trauma treatments, so please don't complain if I didn't say your favorite kind or go, well, these are evidence-based treatments. I have nothing against evidence-based treatments except that they don't always work.
Right.
Or they don't work permanently. They don't work in the long run. And I know that memory reconsolidation, again, the whole point is it works when the person no longer has the symptom or feeling and they can no longer trigger it.
Well, you had me at LSD, so.
I figured. So, now everybody's going to be, please don't do this at home, kids. This is something that is done in a very controlled way. So, don't just run out and start doing it. Although Oregon apparently legalized all substances, so apparently you can go to Oregon and do all of that without having to worry about. But, we want you to do it correctly. So
I just never realized that the kid on my corner was a scientist.
more than
I'm sorry,
we
people.
might have.
We're just having a little bit of this
More
is a
than
hard
you
subject.
might have known.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they never could really research these medications. Well, I call them medications now, these drugs, because they were Schedule 1 federal narcotics, and so you couldn't even have them or possess them without running the risk of going to jail. So there was no research money available because you couldn't even.
Well, Timothy Leary was doing stuff with them. Ram Dass,
Yes. Philosopher.
and he did serious studies out of Stanford with some of this stuff. And then he found he was able to get the effect spiritually when he met his guru. In fact, one of the things that impressed him, and I'm kind of giving the Reader's Digest version of this, so I'm sorry, or Clifton Notes, I should say. Cliff Notes. Boy, I'm really struggling tonight.
I like Clifton better than Clifton.
Yeah, well, that's because that's a good cafeteria in L.A. Yeah. But what he was doing, trying to reach these experiences, the guy who wound up becoming his guru,
right,
took a whole handful of these things. Well, it should have killed an elephant, and I guess it's good there was an elephant there. And he took them, had no effect. And so the guy who became Ram Dass was really impressed with this. He says, how do I get what you're getting without the LSD? And he taught him to do that, and that's how Ram Dass became the philosopher.
Oh, wow. And spiritual kind of guru, and yeah.
And if you read his stuff, it's really deep. I'm a big fan of his, of really self-awareness, spirituality, and connection universally. But he found what he was trying to get with the LSD this way.
Yeah, natural.
So, I didn't mean to get off on that
No,
side
but
track.
it is, what I just said was factual. It is true that they're experimenting and using this, and it's just other ways that this can be treated, and we're discovering new things every day. I did want to say quickly, because I know we're almost out of time,
Right.
How does PTSD look in children? Because many of
Yes.
us have children at home, children that are being affected by COVID in particular. What does trauma look like in children? Well, okay, so some of these same symptoms can appear, but usually with kids, they're going to act it out instead of necessarily show you. So they're going to have maybe emotional outbursts. They're going to maybe have nightmares. They may have night terrors, but they're going to maybe act out through play or other ways, the trauma. They may even sometimes, if the trauma that happened to them was a kind of a predatory nature, they may
cyberbullying,
whether it's bullying or it could be a sexual thing, it could be a physical thing. It's not uncommon to see children act that out one way or the other on other children.
Right.
Okay, so if that's occurring, then that's probably an indicator that the child has had some trauma and they need to get some help. Whether that's specifically PTSD, I don't know, but that means that that's how kids show that something has happened.
A tool, and I'm not recommending this for PTSD, but a tool I find is a good family, if it's a safe family, to use is a thing called the Ungame.
Oh, yeah.
And when I was doing special counseling for junior highs and stuff like that, that was a tool that I used to take. And the idea of it is not so much to find a winner, but to talk about what's going on inside. And really a lot of good stuff took place using that. So
right.
We're down to our last minute here, so I just real quickly want to say, for those of you interested, any teaching supply store, or you can probably just get it on Amazon. It's called the Ungame. And if you're going to play this game, everybody has to be on equal footing. So if you catch a card that asks you when you felt this, you need to be honest like you want them to be honest.
Right.
And sometimes it's easier if you have, it's a good tool for therapists that work with kids.
Yeah.
So
also any expressive for kids, any expressive material, drawing, coloring, especially where they can, play with, some sort of creative expression. That's a good way to kind of let out some of their stuff as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've been listening to Viewpoint with Father John, and my guest tonight has been Dr. John Smith, and I appreciate you letting us into your house one more time. And if no one told you this week that they love you, let me be the first. And if you want more information on any of this, you're welcome to get a hold of me through Instagram or Facebook. And by all means, treat each other with love and with care. And we'll be back next week.
Thank you.
Very important part of the show.
KCAA Loma Linda. Listen on 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, and 106.5 FM.
How you doing? This is Gary Garver. In today's society, the majority of people are not getting enough sleep. I know I'm not. If you're like me and having problems getting a good night's rest,